Just read one quick quote, and you said, resistance is the nervous system's way of signaling when something feels unsafe. So even in our own bodies, we're getting cues that something's not quite right. We need to be hypervigilant. Can you tell us more about what's actually happening inside of our bodies and our brains whenever we either resist change or we detect a threat like that?
We can see change in two ways. We can see change as an opportunity, and so we move towards change if we see that as an opportunity. Now, where pain comes in is where we see change as a threat, disrupt our status quo. The different state that people get into is a defensive state. Brainstorming, it's taught very early on in school, and organizations frequently use it today. It's coming up with all sorts of solutions to a problem. So that is in essence what brainstorming is. And sometimes that creates a level of nervousness if a leader goes to a board meeting, comes back with all sorts of solutions to a problem, and the rest of the organization has to implement that. When we think about leaders and change, oftentimes the mindset is take action, move fast and break things on the extreme end, right? So leaders are action oriented, and there's certainly a role for action. But Peter Drucker, a great management thinker, says the first discipline of leadership, if there's any rule that he would have for leaders, it's to listen first and then act. That's what listening does. It gives us a reality check.
My very special guest is a business school professor at Simon Fraser University, where he teaches leadership in the executive MBA and executive education programs. He is known for his listen and build approach to leadership, which helps organizations with transformational projects through listening. He brings this approach to executive programs, including the AI-empowered leadership program at Simon Fraser University, the KPMG Digital Academy, and the technology leadership program for chief information officers in Canada. He is Dr. Jeffrey Yip. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have found you. I was scrolling through my feed. I don't even know what feed. We got so many feeds these days. I came across an article, we'll talk about it in the interview, that you had written, and I was like, holy cow, this cat gets it. I was so glad to reach out. Did you make connection and you agreed to spend some time with me and my audience? Thanks again for being here.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation.
Well, you know how it's working right now, Jeff. So much change. Everything is just swirling around us. It feels like we're talking about AI. We're talking about generational shifts. We're seeing market disruption. So change is absolutely the name of the game. And I feel like it has been for about 5 years now, maybe more, but it seems like it's speeding up. But what I wanted to ask you is that we know that it's not going altogether well. A lot of times people are digging in their heels a little bit. So my question to get you started, Jeff, what is it that's happening in organizations that's causing this resistance to change? It's what I hear about from clients all the time.
Yeah, what I'm seeing in organizations as well as in programs that I teach on AI-empowered leadership and technology leadership, the resistance to change is coming from two primary areas. Number one is I'm seeing a lot of anxiety. Like we're dealing with a technology now that's different from technologies before it. And this new anxiety is this new technology is potentially going to replace my job. It's going to do things better than what I do. So there's an anxiety around job security, around people's status in the workplace. There's a lot of anxieties around layoffs in organizations. So it's a technology like never before, creating new levels of anxieties. The second that I'm hearing is around exhaustion. Exhaustion didn't end with the pandemic. In fact, the pace of change has just been relentless. Following the pandemic, the transition between remote work back to office, back to remote work, and organizations are still trying to figure that out. And then digital transformation, and then AI adoption. So it's been relentless across functions in organizations. And unfortunately, with this resistance, sometimes leaders at the top are not seeing this because oftentimes it's at levels below that are facing higher levels of exhaustion. Particularly middle managers are really exhausted by trying to manage this change. And so that's causing a lot of resistance. And what's unfortunate is it's not acknowledged enough. It's not validated. And sometimes leaders tend to just push through that resistance rather than working with it.
It sounds almost like a perfect storm. So we never really quite found our footing when it comes to remote and hybrid work. I think these were new work patterns, and there've been some challenges there. I know even a couple of years ago, we were feeling like the levels of separation and isolation, loneliness were climbing, probably in ways that we hadn't really anticipated. Now, all of a sudden, you're exactly right. When it comes to the nature of AI, it feels different than other workplace technologies that we've had to deal with. Maybe, I guess, a close second might be automation and robotics inside of something like manufacturing. But this is so much more widespread and pervasive in what has really become a knowledge economy. Now, knowledge itself is kind of at task. So I, I think you're really hitting on it there.
Yeah. We see it in the markets too. So like what we see in the markets and economies is it's almost like we have two different economies. We have the Max sevens and the hyperscalers, and then the rest of the economy, which we can see still some pain in organizations. And I think that parallels the reality that I'm seeing in organizations too, that technology leaders are excited about the promise of it, but yet oftentimes not acknowledging the struggles, and people are still recovering from all trying to keep up with this change. So I think that's something that leaders really need to be attuned to rather than avoid.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times you mentioned, I guess the first part of it that they may not know what's happening to the let's say the individual contributors or maybe the first line managers. We commonly see there can be a disconnect between executives who just don't have as much exposure to that. But I'm surprised to hear you say that the middle managers are also feeling a little bit of that as well, or that the executives, for example, the leaders may not be as attuned to what they're experiencing. Is there some distancing happening there too between the top of the organization and even the middle at this point?
Yeah, I think so. It has been for a long time that often surveys of burnout show that middle managers are often the most have higher levels of burnout because number one is they need to implement, so they need to lead that change with frontline managers, as well as manage the disconnect from kind of the change initiatives driven at the top. So really squashed in between, and so that's just exacerbated when these realities are more fragmented. It starts with truly acknowledging that there are these two realities in organizations, and acknowledging where the pain point is and connecting kind of the solution. So we have, I think, a bit of a disconnect between potential promising and exciting solutions. But yet, folks who have to implement it are not seeing enough of how the solutions are addressing the problems that they're facing.
So there, yeah, I can see exactly that, and I think also the part that might be a little bit different. Middle managers have always been asked to implement change and to oversee that change at a more local level, and there's always been a translation, if you will, between executive aspirations and what happens on the floor. But I think this part's a little bit different too because I see a lot of headlines that talk about how we're going to be flattening organizations and even cutting out middle managers and taking away a lot of their administrative tasks, and in some cases, reducing the size of that pool. So I feel like now not only is it the same burnout that you always get from just implementing change, but now I know a lot of middle managers who feel like I'm under attack. So it's like it seems like a lot of strain inside the organization. You can almost feel it, whether it's virtual or you're walking the halls.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that the work that middle managers have to do, like as you said, it's around the translation of those strategies and direction for the rest of the organization. And even if as organizations flatten, someone has to do that work, the connection, the bridge between where we're going to our current realities. And so I think leaders really, where listening comes in, is that's an important work to acknowledge what the realities are on the ground. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing with AI adoption is leaders are looking to AI as the magic bullet to try to solve existing problems. And I do often say that we cannot stack new technology on top of a faulty operating system. So none of our problems in organizations are just going to be solved by AI. Rather, they are going to be amplified, and leaders need to be attuned to the human operating system first before making that bridge into new technologies.
I think that's wise advice for sure, and staying focused on that human operating system. The very word "human" means that we have to acknowledge that we have certain reactions to change, and I wanted to talk about the physiological reaction too. When you think about, I mentioned the Psychology Today article that you had written that I had seen and discovered your work through, and I wanted to just read one quick quote. And you said, "Resistance is the nervous system's way of signaling when something feels unsafe." So even in our own bodies, we're getting cues that something's not quite right. We need to be hyper vigilant. Can you tell us more about what's actually happening inside of our bodies and our brains whenever we either resist change or we detect a threat like that?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm glad we connected through that article around pain storming and how organization and the role of organizational pain. So the I guess the psychology on pain or change is oftentimes we can see change in two ways. One is we can see change as an opportunity. And so we move towards change if we see that as an opportunity. Now, where pain comes in is where we see change as a threat. It's going to disrupt our status quo. Change is going to potentially replace us when we talk about people's fears with AI or generative AI. And so when we see change as a threat, our body, our minds respond differently. And how we go, the different state that people get into is a defensive state. So when we see something as a threat, we get defensive to protect ourselves. And that's particularly true with technology change where we don't understand it. We get defensive. We feel that we're going to look more incapable by, this notion of people feeling incompetent because they're not used to the new technology. That's going to create a level of threat. And even worse if they feel that they're going to be replaced by that. And so this level of change as a threat is something that creates a defensive state. And the defensive state, most of us may recognize this or have gone into this, is there's really three things that come out from a defensive state: fight, flight, or freeze. And probably your listeners would have encountered this in organizations. People try to fight the change, or they just passively they say yes to the change, but passively try to ignore it or undermine or not follow through. And finally, they freeze. They in action towards the change. And so, although people may be saying yes to the change, under what's most useful for leaders to know is to see these fight, flight, freeze reaction, which means that really the organization or groups in the organization are actually responding defensively to that change.
And I think for the leaders listening, so you may be feeling this yourself, obviously, depending on the nature of the change you're being asked to carry out or what you're trying to accomplish just because you'd like to. But also recognizing that the humans who work for you are experiencing this at their local level too. And I think it really helps us with, I think it helps us avoid the blame game a little bit, to see this as a natural reaction as opposed to you're choosing to be difficult. No, they're experiencing a threat, they're experiencing pain. And I think that the real challenge that I see too, Jeff, is a lot of times the people in the organization who we've hired to do careful, meticulous, detail-oriented work to keep the organization safe, now we're all excited about new technology and we're like, here, you need to start using this so we can get more productivity. And they're like, wait a second, that's super vague. I didn't ask for this. It goes against everything that I'm trying to accomplish that you actually hired me to do. And this doesn't feel right at all. And I think this is where it's a very inhuman thing to set people up in that way. So I think that either taking our time with change, taking a more human-centric approach to change, there's a combination of things we need to do. Some of it sounds like we need to check our own expectations a little bit and make sure we take our people with us as we try to absorb these new technologies.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. Is like, how do we set people up for change? I like those words that you said, like setting people up for this change. And I think so oftentimes what I'm hearing is when, with kind of plateaued rolled out or change initiatives that have been stuck, what I'm hearing is that people are saying that, how do I get my people on board with this change? You're not moving fast enough. Well, maybe the starting point is to think about how people are receiving that change at first, and to be attuned to, are people actually reflecting a defensive state? So they're saying yes, but they're not actually doing that, or they're pushing back on the change. So that is a fight response or a flight response. And it goes back again to how are people receiving the change? Now, if they're receiving the change as a threat, what I would say is the starting point is around how do we frame the change, and are we really connecting to a real pain point that people are experiencing? Oftentimes, they see it as a threat because they feel that the change is not serving them. It's not addressing their problem. It's something else the organization wants to do. And I think that's the starting point to move change forward is, do they see it as a threat? And how do we communicate the change so that they feel it as a way that's resolving their problem and as a good opportunity for them.
One thing that we see quite often in these reactions, every time that uh, there can be a time, and I'm one of those executives that likes to go super fast without all the details because that's just how I'm wired. But then inevitably, as soon as we announce the change, people who are closer to the customer, for example, will say, "Okay, but did you think of this, this, and this?" They'll start complaining and bringing up all these challenges to my ideas, which I think is actually very appropriate because I haven't really thought through those details, to be honest with you. But I might misinterpret that as being stubborn, argumentative, whatever it might be. And in your article that we've been talking about, you mentioned this process about painstorming. And specifically, you were talking about how a lot of managers have this, what you called a machine solutioning mindset. So it's like in business, we're trained to look for problems and solve them. That's just kind of the way it is. That's kind of our role as managers. We find problems, we fix them, whatever it might be. But I know that that's not always the most productive thing that can happen during times of change. Can you tell me a little bit more about this downsides, if you will, of this machine solutioning mindset that we have sometimes?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, the solution mindset is represented by what your listeners probably know as brainstorming. It's a process it's taught very early on in school, and organizations still frequently use it today. It's coming up with all sorts of solutions to a problem. So that is, in essence, what brainstorming is. And sometimes that creates a level of nervousness if anyone can identify. A leader goes to a board meeting, comes back with all sorts of solutions to a problem, and the rest of the organization has to implement that. Now, there's a role for ideation and brainstorming, but there is also a role for and truly understanding what's the problem that we want to solve. What are the unmet needs and concerns in our workplace? And so there is a role also for what we call painstorming, which is to try to understand it gets out of the solution space to start with the problem space. And I would argue that painstorming should actually come before brainstorming. We need to understand the problem first before we develop the solution. And one of the challenges in organizations now is we have too many solutions. We have an industry that generates solutions, and people are, coming up with too many solutions and not really addressing the fundamental problem. So brainstorming is a way to get at the problem. I'm happy to, share more about what this is. We have a framework that I use around helping, in teams to identify pain points, and that flows pretty well that I see to brainstorming processes.
Yeah, and I think right before we get to that, I think it's just such a great point that we should really focus in on this. A lot of times, our tendency is to jump straight to solutioning mode and do all that brainstorming. Let's get the problem fixed. But I think when that happens, we either presume that others. First of all, we presume that we know the nature of the problem, which may or may not be true. The second, though, is that we also presume that everyone else knows it too. And even if we have more experience, because we're the manager, we're the executive, we kind of have to recognize that unless we want to be doing this and making all the decisions and taking away all the autonomy, it's not okay for us to have all the information about the problem anyway, even if it were true and we were accurate, which is probably pretty unlikely anyway. So I feel like I really am I'm hearing what you're describing, Jeff, and I'm thinking to myself, how many doggone times do I skip right to the solutioning because either I think I know the problem or I'm uncomfortable with the problem. I want to get it solved. And you're like, you know what? That's not what we're expecting of you as a leader. We want to make sure that you fully understand, that it's a collective, that we're all seeing things the same way. Because otherwise, if I'm like, let's do this solution, they're like, I don't even think this makes sense. I don't understand why we're doing this. Is it just because Matt wants to do this thing? And that's no good.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's to our human nature, and that we want to solve problems. And human nature is pretty action oriented. We want, if we see a challenge, we want to lean in and to try to fix it. But the challenge is to be a bit more with complex problems, to be a bit more strategic, to take that step back, to truly understand what the challenge is. And that's so true. Even we see it in the fields of like medicine, like effective medical treatment starts with an accurate diagnosis. And oftentimes, what we see, one of the challenges in medicine too, and for listeners who've gone to a doctor's office, sometimes the doctor does not take time to truly diagnose and understand the patient's history and what the true problem is. And so we see that in organizations too, that leaders have a repertoire of solutions. And there's a saying actually by Abraham Maslow, like if you have a hammer, all you see are nails. And sometimes leaders have that, like they have their toolkit and whatever problem it is. And right now, that hammer is generative AI, trying to hammer all the nails with one toolkit. But really, it starts with what's the problem that we're trying to solve. And leaders really need to take a step back to slow down to understand.
And I think that when we go back to a lot of where we started, which is we're talking about leading humans, and it's human nature to want to go through a process that works for you. So demonstrating that empathy, saying that, whatever it might be, and really taking the time. An old adage I've always followed is when it comes to people, fast is slow and slow is fast. The faster we try to go and jam change through the organization, the longer in the long run it's going to take for us to get there because we've trampled on people's emotions and physiology and all the things we've been talking about. But I cut you off a little bit earlier. Let's talk more about painstorming. How does it actually play out? What are some of the different steps or the elements that kind of go into this notion of that pain isn't necessarily always a bad thing the way that sometimes we think it is?
Yeah. So I have one framework that I use in organizations for brainstorming, and there are others too. But the framework I use is based on the acronym of PAIN, so that it helps people kind of have a structured process. And with the acronym of PAIN, we focus on four things: priorities, P for priorities, A for anxiety, I for inertia, and N for noise. And first, we start with P, priorities. So everyone has a problem that they want to solve. There's a perspective of jobs to be done, that everyone comes to work with a job to be done. Now, that could be their actual tasks. It could be a relational job. It could be an emotional job, but everyone has a priority. And so a pain point, oftentimes people experience pain when the solution that's coming in is not really addressing their priority. So there's a mismatch. Like this new technology, well, it's not really helping me with my priority. So number one, a pain point is around priority. Second is anxiety, and so we're seeing that now with with AI. It's like, what are underlying fears that people have related to that change? I is for inertia. It's about the comfort zone. That how is this new solution going to make my workflow easier? People are comfortable with their existing workflow, and so what is it about the new solution that's going to make their existing workflow better? So that's inertia. And then finally is noise. The challenge often with change is people are overloaded with change, and so there's so much information coming at them. When they have to process even more information, that makes them tired and resistant towards change. So we need to think about how do we need to present our change with a clear signal rather than overwhelming people with more information. So pain, priorities, anxiety, inertia, and noise.
Jeff, I've been doing this a long time, and I guarantee you I did all four of those things to my team this week. I think just by the nature of being well-intentioned, wanting to bring change, excited about this positive future, loving uncertainty, and trying to force a solution before calling timeout and doing before the brainstorm, like you said, let's do the pain storm and recognize those areas where, something that I'm proposing doesn't really help them with their priorities, or another side, like you said, with inertia, where they're like, I didn't ask for this. I'm kind of comfortable with the way I'm doing it today. Why do I have to change? And I think that trying to muscle your way through that when it comes to people it's a terrible idea, but it's one that without a framework like yours, we just inevitably that's just naturally what happens sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great that you're having these conversations, Matt. And yeah, a framework is one way just to structure those conversations. And just like the conversations you've had with your team, using a framework like this could be in a team conversation. It could be in a coaching conversation. So, if a colleague is stuck in a particular challenge, like what's the problem that you're trying to solve? So priorities. Where are you fearful? Where are you anxious about? Where you're going? Where are you feeling stuck? And what truly is the thing that you want to focus on? Differentiating signal from noise.
Those are some really actionable questions. I like that a lot. So would you recommend asking a specific question in each of those four areas that you had shared with us around priorities? Is it almost like, I guess I'm saying, is it an inventory where we need to get an exhaustive list of painstorming to say, let's get all four categories of things onto the page so we're all seeing this the same way?
Yeah, so it can be done one to one, but I love what you mentioned about seeing things in the same way, getting it on the same page. So if it's a cross-functional project, or even in a team where we're all I love the metaphor of the blind people and the elephant. Like we all have a problem to be solved, but because of where we sit in the organization, we're seeing the problems in a different way. And it's useful. It's a useful thing to say, what problem are we trying to solve? What's our priority here? And team members might have different ones. And so we come to alignment around priorities. Anxiety, it's just good to validate the different fears and concerns and then choose one to focus on in the next 30, 60 days. Inertia, to understand from different points of view where they might see this as causing more work and not less work. And so to address that. And finally, to close with a noise, because now we have a lot of information from this discussion. Now, where are we going to focus and move forward on?
I got you. So even just like in brainstorming, you can come up with an exhaustive list, and we say, okay, great, we've got all the ideas out. Maybe some of the best ideas came in the first few minutes. Maybe they came later, or whatever. What are we going to focus on? So sometimes people go through votes, whatever. But I see now that you're saying that the noise could actually have been identified in some of those earlier steps. And we're like, yeah, okay, I mentioned that. That was giving me anxiety, but it's really not that bad compared to this other thing. This is a real problem. You're like, okay, cool. That makes good sense.
Yeah, and closing with noise is particularly important because I think one of the challenges of our time is people are overwhelmed with information, and that causes a lot of, people's to do. I hardly find someone who has cleared their to do list or cleared their stack of papers that they want to read, and so we're overwhelmed with information, and it helps people with change if we can declutter that change. And so ending with noise is particularly important. Like, yeah, maybe we've surfaced more information that we need to in this conversation, but then let's close with like funneling down, like what should we focus our attention on? So brainstorming is just like you mentioned, like we have a process for brainstorming. We might need a process also for problem identification and brainstorming.
We got time for one more question. I wanted to understand change isn't going to slow down. It's not going to go away. We're not going to get to a point of stability anymore, ever again, I don't think. And so, my question for you, Jeff, is when you think about mindset shift, like in a knowing that we're going to head into another year of uncertainty, the year after that's probably going to be uncertain too. Things just seem to be accelerating. What's a mindset shift you want leaders to embrace, specifically leaders, because that's my listeners, when it comes to knowing about resistance to change?
Yeah, I think when we think about leaders and change, oftentimes the mindset is take action, move fast and break things on the extreme end. Right? So leaders are action oriented, and there's certainly a role for action. But Peter Drucker, a great management thinker, says in his writing, he said that what the first discipline of leadership is listening, and he would even say in his writings that if there's any rule that he would have for leaders, it's to listen first and then act. And so it's important before we take action that we're actually taking action that's connected to reality, and that's what listening does. It gives us a reality check. The dangers oftentimes with listening is we're taking action based on our reality. So our reality is AI is going to be a magic bullet. Our reality is people are not tired; they can do more. But if we listen, we truly understand that these are the challenges our organization faces, and we can make that bridge of action into the reality. So I would say listen first before taking action. Leaders can move fast, but if you're moving fast in the wrong direction and even breaking more things, I think that can be helped by listening first. And listening does not need a lot of time. Could be a couple of conversations, and that would really solve. I like what you said, Matt. Like, slow is fast, and if we take time to have those listening conversations first, we can move faster with our change initiative.
I love it. And I love reminds me of the name of your program, Listen and Build. The order's right there. Don't go straight to build until you've listened. It's like, it really all comes together really nicely. As I mentioned, I'm so glad that I found the article. At the same time, I want to do something that I love to do at the end of these conversations and play a trivia game. Now, I didn't mention it at the top, but you and I both studied at Boston University. And we know that Boston is an amazing college town. Love Boston. And so what I thought we'd do is we get a trivia question about Boston-based colleges. Rod, so here it is. There's going to be multiple choice. Which Boston area university was founded first? Is it A, Boston College, B, Harvard University, or C, Northeastern University? Ooh, interesting. Boston College, Harvard, or Northeastern, which was founded first?
Do we take turns to answer or how does
I'm going to go with your answer. What do you think, Jeff?
I think Harvard was first.
I think Harvard was first. So, audience, if you're playing along at home, we're going to go with Harvard. And so, question on the table: which Boston area university was founded first? Is it A, Boston College, B, Harvard University, or C, Northeastern University? We went with Harvard, and that is correct. It was founded in 1936, making it not only the oldest of these three, but the oldest in the United States. Wow, Jeff crushed that one. I love it. I have a much better question for you, Jeff. Where can my audience listeners go to learn more about you?
Okay. Thanks, Matt. There's three ways. One is if you're interested in the listen and build approach to leadership and leading change, we have a playbook that's freely available, publicly available. So listeningworks.ca. So listeningworks.ca is where the group that I'm working with, we put out listening tools, and the listening playbook is one of them that we do, and that's something that I use in teaching leadership. Have leaders work through that playbook in their change initiative. The second is I have a blog on psychology today. It's called Listen and Build. So if you look up Listen and Build on a regular basis, I'm putting articles from the tools that we're developing, from the programs that I'm in, and sharing some of the insights around the Listen and Build approach to leadership. And thirdly, I do post occasionally on LinkedIn, and I do respond to messages and connections. Matt and we connected through there too. So if you just look Jeffrey Yip on LinkedIn, I'm happy to connect with folks who have questions or would like to just have a chat.
I love it. Thanks so much for that, Jeff. And listeners, I'm going to have those links for you in the show notes. So you're only one click away from connecting with Dr. Jeffrey Yip. All the great information about Listen and Build and the other resources that you mentioned. Jeff, thanks so much for spending some time and really taking us to school on why we need to listen before building and the value of brainstorming. It's not just complaining. It's part of our process of moving forward. I love it.
Thanks, Matt. Really enjoyed the conversation and also our little Boston trivia at the end.
And thank you to our listeners, of course, for listening in and investing in yourself and listening to all the great things that Jeff told us about today. If you've got an extra 30 seconds, would really appreciate it if you leave a 5-star rating on Spotify or on whatever podcast player you're listening to. Helps me find other leaders to help them get the type of insights that we just got from Jeff today. So that's it for today's show. Thank you so much. And remember, don't just manage the business when you can lead the people.